Hello, my name is Odyssey Jones, and I am a film student at Full Sail University, and I would like to talk about the history of documentary filmmaking. I am a documentary filmmaker myself on a network called Honey Network that I created. So I chose this topic because I am very passionate about it. I'd like to speak about documentary filmmaking from a timeline point of view. So starting in 1898, the first documentary was filmed by a neurologist, filming step by step of his procedure. At that point, documentaries were like informative, really much for a sense of visual storytelling, pretty much. There was no sound, there was no color, but they were telling a story visually. And so, although the term documentary was not coined until 1926, plenty of documentaries were around before 1926, such as the Lumiere brothers, and they were filming like everyday French life, which really intrigued the people. Like, it was a big thing just to film everyday life, which is kind of how things are now. And then you have a really big filmmaker known as Pathé. He was filming in the 1890s, way before, the term documentary was ever coined. And so I'd like to come and bring up 1908, newsreels come about. So with newsreels, we're showing like informative things, information. You got to remember that television was not around then, so a lot of people depended on newsreels to get information about what was going on in the world, whether it was biased or not. A lot of times those filmmakers would favor what they believe sometimes, and that's why you have to really consider, well, is that a documentary if the filmmaker is biased? But those were very important then, and then they went from just being informative to more so propaganda towards the 1930s. In the 1930s, they started to use them like to push the war, and they became really important for the war and recruiting for the war and things like that. And so in 1989, a better camera starts to be created. This is before newsreels and things come about. So a newer camera, a better camera, a more lightweight camera had been invented, which helped a lot with the production of these newsreels. So now here we are in the 1930s. We also get color. The very first influential films, and like two very influential films during this time, Gone with the Wind and The Wizard of Oz. One thing I like to point out in The Wizard of Oz is they were transitioning from black and white to color in real life. And in The Wizard of Oz, there's an iconic scene where they open a door and it's black and white before she opens the door, and she opens the door and it's color. I think that was the way to bring color to the world. Like that was very iconic, and that was in the 1930s. And so now we are in 1950s. In the 1950s, we are starting to develop more authentic film. The cameras are lighter than, like, the cameras are developing more and more. And documentary channels are being introduced to the world in 1980s and in early 2000s. So they, in the 1950s, were introducing the Hollywood standard. Star Wars were coming out in 1970s. Close Encounters came out in 1970s, where they're now using computer technology in these films, and then which was kind of a little bit frowned upon, but it was cool. And then cable documentaries between the 1980s and the early 2000s, where now documentaries are on TV and they're more accessible to people. On top of the fact that we're getting to the point where we're having freelance documentary, filmmakers. And so here we are in the 1990s, where we're getting more digital technology. We're going from film cameras to digital cameras, which really made a big splash in the documentary film world. Cameras, the Sony VX1000, the Canon XL1 were very accessible and cheaper than film cameras so that the average person could afford it, and that opened up the gateway to more independent filmmakers. Also film editing programs such as Avid and Final Cut Pro, along with distribution. Now we have VHS tapes, we have CDs and DVDs coming into place. You know, VHS tapes are coming in 1997. The 80s and 90s, and then we have DVDs in 1997, and we have places where you can go and buy them, Blockbusters and things like that. We have platforms such as Netflix and Amazon Prime being introduced, and that gave independents more access to distributing their films to the masses, instead of having to be in the film industry and go through all those things. The average person could film a nice quality movie and put it on Amazon Prime, which is why I built my own network. But still, I would put one of my shows on Amazon Prime. And I would also like to talk about the future of filmmaking. At this current moment, we're being introduced to things like we have 5G networks, we have AI, we have augmented, we have AG, we have a lot of stuff. And we have higher frame rates, which is essential to filmmaking and the advancement of filmmaking. And then we have things such as The Hobbit, which used a higher film rate, and it was very successful. I watched it, I was fascinated. And so it is important to remember that, which I would like to say, the VR, virtual reality, 5G networks, the AI, high frame rates, things like that, are they taking away the authenticity of filmmaking? They said the same thing when sound came. They said the same thing when color came. They said the same thing when platforms like Netflix and Amazon came. Change is good. As a filmmaker, you have to remember to change with the times and to advance with the times, and that is how you stay with the times.